What happens when young love turns deadly, when passion and obsession collide behind closed doors, leaving betrayal, horror, and bloodshed in their wake? These aren't stories of petty jealousy or teenage tantrums. These are real cases, twisted teen couples who made a pact not to run away together, but to kill. From chilling confessions to calculated crimes, from courtroom breakdowns to life sentences, you're about to enter the minds of America's most dangerous young lovers. And the most haunting part? They look just like any other teenagers. Until it was too late. Keep watching, because the truth behind these relationships is darker than fiction, and some of their final words will stay with you forever. Case 1. Tabitha Messina and Carlos Christopher. In the summer of 2007, suburban South Euclid, Ohio, looked like any other quiet middle-class neighborhood. But behind closed doors, a darkness was brewing. 18-year-old Tabitha Messina, fresh out of high school, and her 19-year-old boyfriend, Carlos Christopher, a young man with a troubled past, were about to commit a crime that would shake the community and expose the chilling volatility of teenage impulsivity mixed with emotional manipulation. Tabitha's relationship with her father, Richard Messina, had been strained for years. He was strict, a protective presence, Tabitha once described as the only man I've ever loved, but he also enforced curfews and boundaries she chafed against. That tension peaked on July 28th, when Richard demanded Tabitha return a borrowed cell phone. The argument turned explosive, sowing a seed of resentment in Tabitha's heart. She later admitted she had expected a punishment, but nothing could have prepared her for what followed. That evening, Tabitha and Carlos attended a festival with friends. Witnesses later recalled how Tabitha, despite her conflict with her father, laughed and flirted like any other teen. Carlos, a Brazilian-born adoptee who had grown up watching his gangster father, carried an aura of danger, tinting the ordinary with unease. The couple's emotional entanglement was intense, chemistry intertwined with control, affection tangled with volatility. Moments after midnight on July 29th, they returned to Tabitha's father's house, allegedly to retrieve property. Carlos carried an axe, Tabitha a crowbar, and together they crossed a line they would never return from. Police found evidence of theft, open safes, missing possessions, but that only scratched the surface of what unfolded in the bedroom. While details of the violence remain graphic, the focus in court became the highly premeditated nature of the crime, the way the couple staged the theft to mask their true intent. Investigators uncovered critical forensic proof: DNA on makeshift weapons, scene staging, and removed light bulbs meant to disarm alarm systems. The disarray wasn't chaotic, it was crafted. A behavioral analysis would later conclude that Tabitha had orchestrated the scenario, while Carlos, emotionally manipulated, became an accomplice who believed he was protecting Tabitha from a parent who hated him. During the investigation and legal proceedings, Tabitha's psychological profile surfaced repeatedly. Despite outward rebellion, she revealed regret and emotional fracture during court testimony. Saying "I'm sorry" in interviews from prison, Tabitha portrayed herself as a young woman overwhelmed by emotion and misguided loyalty. Carlos, on the other hand, expressed he believed he was doing it out of love, his remorse framed through the distorted lens of manipulation rather than malevolence. In May 2008, Carlos Christopher was convicted of aggravated murder and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without parole. Tabitha accepted a plea, effing justice and rehabilitation goals that considered her youth and possible coercion. She remains eligible for parole in 2067 at age 78. A far cry from the life Carlos will undoubtedly spend behind bars. Their sentencing hearing was a vivid showcase of legal proceedings in action. Prosecutors argued the crime was planned, personal, and heinous, far beyond a stolen argument. Defense counsel pointed to Tabitha's youth, possible coercion, and the manipulation of Carlos by a partner he doted on. It became a case study in juvenile justice, raising questions about whether young offenders are puppets or perpetrators. More than a decade on, the Tabitha and Carlos case offers critical public safety takeaways. First, it speaks to the importance of recognizing signs of abusive or controlling behavior in teenage relationships. That a loving, rebellious teen could become a trigger for violence demonstrates how psychological pressure can distort ethical judgment. Secondly, rehabilitation and criminal justice reform must account for the fluid emotional development of young adults who commit violent offenses within relationships built on chaos rather than love. From a legal standpoint, the case underscores the necessity of transparent investigation, robust forensic evidence, and procedural justice. The couple's case featured careful forensic analysis, expert psychological testimony, and courtroom drama, reflecting the delicate balance between accountability and understanding coercion. Ultimately, the Tabitha Messina and Carlos Christopher story isn't just about a brutal crime. It's a lesson. It reminds us that emotional disturbance and manipulation can manifest as lethal violence, especially when crime is rationalized as an act of protection or revenge. As we digest this chilling account, the hope is that parents, educators, and communities engage young people in conversations about healthy relationships, mental health support, and the consequences of letting anger fester into action. Case 2. Tylar Witt and Stephen Culver. Tylar Witt was just 14 when she fell under the spell of 19-year-old Stephen Culver. What began as an intense teenage infatuation quickly spiraled into something far more dangerous, something that would end with a mother murdered and 2 young lives destroyed. To outsiders, Tylar seemed like a bright, imaginative girl, but behind closed doors, she was becoming increasingly isolated, consumed by a romance that was both illegal and emotionally toxic. Stephen, nearly 5 years older, had a hold on her that blurred the lines between love and manipulation. Their bond was forged in secrecy and rebellion, and by the time Joanne Witt, Tylar's mother, realized what was happening, it was already too late to stop the damage. Joanne had allowed Stephen to stay in their home briefly, believing he was a friend helping Tylar with schoolwork. But that arrangement collapsed when she walked in and discovered her daughter in a compromising situation with him. Joanne was devastated. Her daughter was underage. Stephen was an adult. She did what many parents would. She reported the relationship to the police and turned in Tylar's diary, which contained disturbing entries about their sexual encounters. It was a move meant to protect her daughter, but it would become the spark that ignited a deadly plan. Faced with the reality that Stephen could be charged with statutory rape and sentenced to years in prison, Tylar became overwhelmed with panic. Together, the couple decided there was only one solution. If Joanne was gone, no one could separate them. They didn't just want to run away, they believed they had to erase the obstacle in their path. On June 11, 2009, Tylar crushed sleeping pills into her mother's drink, waited until she fell asleep, and then opened the door for Stephen to enter. According to Tylar, Stephen took a knife and went into Joanne's bedroom while she stayed in another room, trying not to listen. Joanne was stabbed repeatedly, and her body was left under a blanket with the air conditioning turned low in a calculated attempt to delay discovery. Joanne's co-workers became concerned when she didn't show up for work. Days later, police conducted a welfare check and found her body. What followed was a rapid and intense investigation. Tylar and Stephen had vanished. They fled to San Francisco, where they tried to take their own lives by ingesting rat poison and sleeping pills, washing it down with cake in what they believed would be their final meal. But the suicide attempt failed. Police found them disoriented behind a dumpster at a mall, where they were arrested without resistance. The legal proceedings that followed revealed the psychological unraveling that had taken place in the weeks leading up to the murder. Tylar's defense painted her as a vulnerable child who had been manipulated by an older boyfriend. She claimed she never touched the knife, never intended to kill her mother, and only wanted to stop the pain she felt from being torn away from Stephen. Her lawyers spoke of emotional trauma, dissociation, and adolescent impulsivity. But prosecutors argued she was just as responsible. They presented her diary entries, her prior threats against her mother, and the planning she had done to help carry out the crime. In the courtroom, the most damning evidence came from forensic analysis. DNA matching Stevens was found under Joanne's fingernails, suggesting a violent struggle. Faced with the weight of the evidence, Tyler took a plea deal. She agreed to testify against Stephen in exchange for a reduced charge. She pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 15 years to life. Stephen, after a separate trial, was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. Years later, Tyler's case would again make headlines. In 2022, at the age of 27, she was granted parole. The decision raised difficult questions about rehabilitation and justice. Could someone who helped orchestrate her own mother's death ever truly be reformed? And what responsibility does society have in supporting vulnerable teenagers before they spiral into violence? This case serves as a tragic example of how dangerous adolescent relationships can become when they are steeped in secrecy, desperation, and psychological instability. It forces us to consider how fragile the boundary is between emotional turmoil and criminal action. Joanne Witt did what she believed was right. She trusted the legal system to intervene. But the system wasn't fast enough, and her daughter's emotional descent was far deeper than anyone realized. For viewers of Mindframe True Crimes, the story of Tyler Witt and Stephen Culver is a chilling reminder that some of the most disturbing crimes don't begin with hardened criminals. They begin in bedrooms, with teenagers, secrets, and emotions that spiral out of control. Case 3. Jasmine Richardson and Jeremy Steinkey. At just 12 years old, Jasmine Richardson became involved with Jeremy Steinkey, a 23-year-old man deeply involved in a gothic subculture that romanticized darkness, defiance, and fantasy. Their connection, forged online and in person, would spiral into one of Canada's most disturbing criminal cases. A case that forced society to examine the limits of adolescent perception, emotional manipulation, and the consequences of unchecked obsession. It wasn't just the age gap that shocked the public. It was the nature of the crime they committed together and the chilling sense of detachment that followed. Jeremy Steinkey wasn't a typical adult. He wore a vial of blood around his neck, identified as a 300-year-old werewolf, and told people he liked the taste of blood. He was absorbed in gothic and vampire-themed forums, and many who knew him dismissed it as eccentricity or theatricality. Jasmine, still navigating the emotional chaos of early adolescence, was drawn to him like a moth to flame. Their conversations quickly turned intense. Online, they fantasized about a life together, one where no one could interfere, not even her parents. When Jasmine's family found out about the relationship, they were horrified. Her parents, Mark and Deborah Richardson, tried to intervene. They grounded her, took away internet privileges, and forbid her from seeing Jeremy. But instead of extinguishing the romance, their actions deepened the secrecy and fueled a dangerous narrative. That Jasmine was being imprisoned, and Jeremy was her liberator. In their private messages, the couple began discussing how to solve the problem. Their solution was unthinkable. What followed was not just a murder, but a calculated attempt to eliminate the entire Richardson family so they could be together without opposition. On April 23, 2006, Jeremy entered the Richardson home in Medicine Hat, Alberta. With Jasmine nearby, Mark and Deborah were brutally killed, followed by Jasmine's 8-year-old brother, Jacob. While the details of the crime scene are horrific, courtroom reporting and trial testimony would focus less on the violence and more on the motive, the psychology of two people so consumed by fantasy and fear that they lost touch with reality. The investigation moved quickly. Law enforcement linked the pair through Jasmine's online activity and found them the next day in the town of Leader, Saskatchewan. The two were laughing and affectionate, showing no immediate signs of remorse. What baffled investigators most was Jasmine's demeanor. At 12, she was barely a teenager, yet she spoke with confidence and emotional detachment about the events. The psychological profile that emerged during the legal proceedings suggested that she had embraced a distorted worldview under Jeremy's influence. Experts later examined whether she understood the full weight of her actions, or if she had become psychologically entangled in a fantasy built on Jeremy's delusions. In court, the legal proceedings were closely watched by the media and public alike. Canada had never seen anything quite like it. Because of her age, Jasmine could not be named initially under the Youth Criminal Justice Act, though her identity became widely known as the case gained international attention. Her trial revealed a complicated picture of adolescent development, emotional immaturity, and the powerful sway of an older partner with dangerous ideas. Jasmine claimed she believed her parents were trying to destroy her life and that being with Jeremy was worth anything, even if it meant removing the people who loved her most. Jeremy's trial was different in tone. His defense leaned into a narrative of passionate love, painting him as someone desperate to be with Jasmine. However, the court found him guilty on 3 counts of first-degree murder. The sentencing hearing concluded with a life sentence and no parole eligibility for 25 years. Jasmine, who was 13 by the time of her trial, became the youngest person in Canadian history to be convicted of multiple counts of murder. She was sentenced to the maximum allowed under youth law, 10 years, including credit for time served and 4 years in a psychiatric facility. Part of her sentence focused on rehabilitation. This case reignited public debate around juvenile crime and how far the justice system should go in holding children accountable for adult-level crimes. Should someone so young face the same consequences as an adult? Or is there a path toward rehabilitation that society must pursue, no matter how horrific the offense? Jasmine's release in 2016, at the age of 23, was met with quiet unease. By then, she had completed extensive psychiatric treatment, received education while in custody, and was declared low risk by parole officers. Still, the emotional scars left on the community of Medicine Hat remain deep and unresolved. The story of Jasmine Richardson and Jeremy Steinkey challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about the vulnerabilities of youth, the power of manipulation, and the thin line between fantasy and criminal action. It reminds us that teenagers, while often perceived as emotionally volatile or rebellious, are still developing cognitively and psychologically. When that development is disrupted by toxic influences, the consequences can be catastrophic. From an investigative standpoint, the case underscored the critical role of digital forensics in uncovering motive and intent. It also demonstrated how quickly online conversations can escalate into real-world violence when warning signs are ignored or dismissed. For parents, educators, and mental health professionals, the lessons are sobering. Early intervention matters. Open communication matters. And understanding the psychological development of young people is not optional. It is a public safety imperative. Jasmine Richardson was no ordinary 12-year-old. But her case forces us to reconsider what children are capable of when pushed into emotional corners. Case 4. Erika Sifrit and Benjamin Sifrit. Erika and Benjamin Sifrit once looked like an all-American couple. Young, attractive, and seemingly successful, they gave every impression of being ordinary newlyweds enjoying their first summer together. But behind the matching smiles and vacation photos was a deeply fractured relationship built on dominance, obsession, and a shared need for control. By the end of May 2002, that illusion shattered when they were arrested in Ocean City, Maryland, and implicated in one of the most disturbing double homicides the town had ever seen. What began as a beach getaway quickly spiraled into a chilling tale of manipulation, impulsivity, and a psychological unraveling that left 2 innocent people dead and a courtroom grasping for answers. The victims were Joshua Ford and Martha Jeannie Crutchley, a couple from Virginia who had come to Ocean City for Memorial Day weekend. They met the Sifrits during a night out, and what started as casual conversation turned into an invitation back to the Sifrits' condo. No one knows exactly what happened behind those closed doors, but days later, Joshua and Jeannie were missing. Their families grew concerned when calls went unanswered and hotel checkouts were missed. A missing persons report led to an investigation that quickly picked up momentum. The turning point came when Erika and Benjamin were arrested, not for murder initially, but for burglary. They had attempted to break into a Hooters restaurant, triggering an alarm. When police searched Erika's purse, they made a shocking discovery: Joshua and Jeannie's IDs. What followed was a deep dive into the couple's movements, behaviors, and psychological state, leading detectives to a crime that was not only senseless, but premeditated in ways that were difficult to comprehend. Benjamin Sifrit had a military background, once a Navy SEAL trainee before being discharged under troubling circumstances. Erika was a former honor student and athlete, but after marrying Benjamin, friends noted a dramatic shift in her personality. Their relationship was intense and volatile, marked by power struggles and emotional codependency. The psychological profile that emerged during legal proceedings showed a dynamic where Benjamin thrived on control, while Erika craved approval and attention, sometimes to disturbing extremes. The prosecution argued that the Sifrits had lured Joshua and Jeannie into their condo, then turned on them over a minor accusation of theft. According to trial testimony, Erika became enraged, accusing the guests of stealing her purse. What followed was a night of terror, with Benjamin taking the lead in the violence and Erika allegedly participating or encouraging him. Investigators later found the couple had disposed of the bodies in a grotesque and methodical manner, scattering remains in a Delaware dumpster and across state lines. The sentencing hearings were split between the two. Erika and Benjamin were tried separately to avoid prejudicing jurors, and each blamed the other for the killings. Erika's defense portrayed her as a victim of Benjamin's abusive influence, someone caught in a spiral of fear and coercion. Her attorneys suggested she was manipulated into participating, too scared or emotionally unstable to stop what was happening. But prosecutors countered that Erika was not only complicit, she was active in the crime, taking photographs and helping with the aftermath. Benjamin's trial presented him as the dominant force, but even his defense tried to shift responsibility onto Erika. Ultimately, the jury believed both played critical roles. Benjamin was convicted of second-degree murder and received a 38-year sentence. Erika was convicted of first-degree murder and handed a life sentence plus 20 years. Their divergent outcomes sparked debate, not just over who was more culpable, but over how manipulation, emotional dependency, and identity play into criminal behavior. This case raised important questions within the justice system. How does a seemingly average couple devolve into killers? What signs were missed, and could any intervention have prevented it? The Sifrit case became a focal point for discussions about toxic relationships, especially those built on imbalance and psychological codependence. For many, Erika's transformation from honor student to convicted murderer highlighted how influence and emotional instability can shape even the most promising individuals into someone unrecognizable. Law enforcement officials have since pointed to the Sifrit case as an example of why early behavioral red flags, like obsessive control, antisocial tendencies, and rapid personality shifts, should not be ignored. The investigation itself relied heavily on digital forensics, timeline reconstruction, and witness testimony from locals who remembered seeing the couples together on the night of the crime. Surveillance footage and electronic records helped prosecutors piece together what little was left behind by a couple that seemed determined to erase their tracks. Years later, Erika remains behind bars, while Benjamin has sought sentence reductions without success. Neither has expressed meaningful remorse in public statements, leaving the families of Joshua and Jeannie with few answers. For those who study criminal behavior, The Sifrits remain a case study in how psychological dysfunction can masquerade as charm and how relationships based on domination and insecurity can spiral into tragedy. Case 5. Amanda Logue and Jason Andrews. Amanda Logue was living two lives, a seemingly ordinary housewife and mother in Georgia by day, and Sunny Day, a fetish model and adult film star by night. Jason Andrews, 27, known in the porn world as a charismatic and handsome DJ turned actor, was her partner in both business and life. Their connection ran deep, built on thrill-seeking, sexual power play, and a shared hunger for darker experiences. Beneath their excitement lurked troubling psychological cues, a craving for control, a desensitization to violence, and an emotional bond that blurred morality under the guise of adventure. When the pair traveled to Newport Richey, Florida, in May 2010, they met 41-year-old tattoo parlor owner Dennis Scooter Abrahamson during a swingers sex party at his home. In that charged atmosphere, Amanda and Jason saw more than an evening of adult fun. They saw an opportunity. Police later recovered text messages between them discussing a plan and timing, a chilling example of how modern technology can facilitate premeditated crime. As Amanda texted Jason, she would just get him relaxed and face down, while Jason replied, "Take your time." Investigators described discovering that Amanda could not wait to have sex with him after they did the deed, suggesting disturbing emotional rewards entwined with violence. Later that night, after most guests had left, Amanda lured Dennis to lie face down on a massage table. Jason, waiting outside, entered at her signal. The crime scene left little doubt about the brutality. Dennis had been stabbed multiple times and bludgeoned with a sledgehammer, his skull caved in. Police found a bloody sledgehammer and knives at the scene, as well as a safe emptied of cash, credit cards, and a camera. This was no robbery gone wrong, but a calculated thrill kill. The investigation accelerated when Amanda and Jason tried to use Dennis's credit card at Home Depot. Police bundled surveillance footage, digital forensics, and those damning text messages into a rock-solid case. A knife with Jason's DNA tied him directly to the scene, while the message exchange laid bare their planning and motive. Under pressure, both Amanda and Jason took plea deals to avoid the death penalty. Jason pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to life without parole in 2012. Amanda accepted a reduced charge of second-degree murder and received a 40-year sentence. During the sentencing hearing, prosecutors highlighted the disturbing nature of a thrill kill committed for sexual gratification and financial gain, arguing this wasn't a crime of passion, but one born of emotional detachment and power-driven obsession. In the courtroom drama that followed, trial testimony revealed key elements of their partner dynamic and how psychological influence can distort judgment. Jason emerged as the dominant force, orchestrating the timing and execution, while Amanda acted as both lure and accomplice. Defense arguments claimed she was coerced, but the evidence of her active participation, selecting the timing, initiating the assault, and helping fence stolen property, undermined any claim of her being a mere puppet. This case raises urgent questions for criminal justice and public safety. Their dual lives, Amanda as a caring mother and adult entertainer, Jason as a sociable performer, exemplify how charm and normalcy can mask deep-seated psychopathy. It underscores the importance of digital forensics in modern investigations. Cell data, text transcripts, surveillance footage, and DNA evidence drove every critical step from arrest to conviction. Psychological profiling of Amanda and Jason showed a thrill-seeking duo, emotionally dysregulated and tuned to power and domination. For viewers and law enforcement, it's a reminder that early warning signs, violent fantasies, obsession with sexual control, secrecy, should trigger heightened scrutiny. Communities reliant on peer networks, online forums, or social media must understand how ordinary connections can facilitate violent pairings. Public safety takeaways are clear. Never underestimate the capacity for violence in relationships built on the veneer of glamour, sex, or adventure. Detectives advise recognizing patterns, isolating, fantasy-prone behaviors, obsessive texting, sudden financial struggles, or flare-ups of aggression. Intervention could break cycles before they spiral into murders after midnight. In the aftermath, rehabilitation prospects for both Amanda and Jason have been dim. Their pleas signaled acceptance of guilt but lacked remorse. With life sentences ahead, the focus shifts to accountability. Even appeals and sentence reductions have been consistently rejected. Their silent futures starkly contrast with the violent enthusiasm they once shared. This case cracked open the fantasy world of a porn star couple and revealed how easily thrill-seeking can morph into violence. It reminds us that charismatic individuals, no matter how polished or seductive, can hide behavioral pathology. Styling this into any thriller would be poetic, but this is real life. Text messages etched with intent, cold premeditation, and a relationship grounded in control rather than love. It's a cautionary tale that shines light on dark impulses, digital footprints, and the crucial role of forensic investigation in safeguarding society from the unexpected danger that can lurk behind everyday masks. Case 6. Holly Harvey and Sandra Ketchum. Holly Harvey was just 15 when she and her 16-year-old girlfriend, Sandra Sandy Ketchum, carried out a crime that shook Georgia and sparked national headlines. On August 2, 2004, the two teens brutally murdered Holly's grandparents in their Fayette County home. Their motive wasn't robbery, drug addiction, or mental illness. It was a desperate bid for freedom and a naive, terrifying belief that removing adult authority would secure their future together. This case wasn't just a crime story. It was a psychological breakdown, an investigation that tested law enforcement methods, and a courtroom drama that raised alarm about adolescent capacity for violence. The psychological profile of Holly and Sandy revealed a volatile combination: teenage rebellion, codependency, and the urge to escape parental control. Holly had recently moved in with her Baptist grandparents after her mother went to prison. Friends described her as a rebellious teenager who chafed under their strict rules. Sandra, impulsive and intense, became her confidant and partner in defiance. According to Holly's trial testimony, the idea started as a juvenile fantasy. They tested knives on mattresses, plotted to steal the grandparents' truck, and decided that killing them would grant the freedom they craved. On the afternoon of the murders, the girls smoked marijuana to mask the smell and lure Carl and Sarah Collier downstairs. Holly, eyes closed, stabbed her grandmother while Sandy waited ready. When Carl intervened, Holly stabbed him too, then called Sandra for help. Their investigation began when the grandparents didn't return from a prayer meeting. When the bodies were found, detectives discovered the gruesome evidence, including the knife and stolen truck, which the girls fled in afterward. Holly and Sandy were arrested a day later on Tybee Island, Georgia. Their demeanor, a bizarre mix of detachment and adolescent bravado, flipped the public perception. In interviews, law enforcement described them as calm, almost emotionless. This illustrated a chilling disconnect between their emotional immaturity and the gravity of their act. The legal proceedings were fierce. Tried as adults, both girls faced charges of murder and armed robbery. Holly eventually pleaded guilty to malice murder in courts after being indicted on multiple counts. Sandy cooperated with authorities and pled guilty to felony murder, receiving concurrent life sentences and eligibility for parole after a decade. During trial testimony, Holly described closing her eyes while stabbing her grandmother, a haunting moment that crystallized the brutality of the act. The sentencing hearing revealed deep contrasts. Holly received 2 consecutive life sentences with parole possible after 20 years. Sandy was sentenced to 3 concurrent life terms with eligibility after 10 years. Judges recognized the need for punishment but also showed awareness of their youth and potential for rehabilitation. Holly's later attempts to withdraw her plea reached Georgia's Supreme Court, which affirmed her conviction, noting her legal counsel was adequate. This case triggered broader discussion about juvenile justice. Could 2 teenage girls, influenced by codependency and youthful rebellion, truly understand their actions? the justice system wrestled with whether to treat them as child perpetrators or adult criminals. George's approach, a combination of life sentences and parole possibilities, reflected a balance between accountability and awareness of adolescent development. From a public safety standpoint, the murders highlight warning signs of toxic teenage dynamics. Isolation from parents, defiance of authority, experimentation with substances, and obsessive romantic relationships can create dangerous emotional environments. Mental health professionals argue for early intervention, family therapy, community support, school counseling, to redirect emotional turmoil before it spirals. Law enforcement agencies now use digital behavioral analysis and school threat assessments to locate dangerous pairings like Holly and Sandy's before they become lethal. The case also emphasized the importance of thorough investigation techniques, reconstructing timelines from phone records, forensic examination of weapons, and careful interview of juvenile suspects. It became a training case for rural Georgia law enforcement in handling violent youth cases. For viewers, the tragedy of Holly Harvey and Sandra Ketchum is a stark lesson. Teenagers are emotionally vulnerable, impulsive, and yet can commit crimes with chilling coldness. Charismatic relationships rooted in fantasy and isolation can mask serious danger. The criminal justice system must balance punishment with developmental needs, offering rehabilitation while protecting society. In the end, their story wasn't about evil masterminds. It was two lost teenagers whose desperation led them to commit a betrayal so terrible that it still resonates. A murder motivated not by hatred, but by a toxic need for escape. The victims, Carl and Sarah Collier, were family members simply trying to guide a troubled granddaughter. Their deaths underline the cost of ignoring warning signs and of unaddressed emotional pain. The case remains a caution to parents, educators, and law enforcement. Teenage crises deserve immediate attention before silence becomes tragedy. Case 7. Sheila, Eddy, and Rachel Shoaf. Sheila, Eddy, and Rachel Shoaf were inseparable friends in their small West Virginia hometown. Two 15-year-olds who had bonded over school, social media, and teenage drama. For years, they formed a tight-knit trio with another friend, Skylar Nice, a 16-year-old honor student with dreams of becoming a lawyer. But beneath the veneer of high school camaraderie, tension began to simmer. By the spring of 2012, mockery, exclusion, and unspoken rivalry turned smiles into cold shoulders. Investigators would later reveal through cell phone records and social media posts that Eddy and Shoaf felt increasingly trapped and resentful, convinced that Skylar threatened their secrets. Their friendship fractured, but the spark that ignited their darkest act lay in a psychological dynamic far more sinister, one of groupthink, emotional contagion, and adolescent impulsivity. The murder of Skylar Nice on July 6, 2012 began innocuously. Skylar snuck out of her parents' home around midnight to join Eddy and Shoaf for a smoke session in a wooded area near the Pennsylvania state line. The three girls climbed into Eddy's car with pre-packed knives, bleach, rags, and even a shovel, tools that hinted at premeditation. The motive, as confessed later, was chillingly simple. We didn't like her anymore. In the woods, they counted to 3 and stabbed Skylar dozens of times, an act that seemed to validate the mob mentality that had overtaken their adolescent minds. The investigation was tremendously complex. When Skylar failed to return home, law enforcement treated her disappearance as a runaway case. No Amber Alert was issued. Her parents distributed flyers and pleaded for help, but months slipped by with no trace. Meanwhile, Eddy and Shoaf feigned innocence, posting social media messages claiming they were frantic, even handing out missing person leaflets themselves. But surveillance footage and cell tower data soon contradicted their alibis. Skylar had left with them after midnight in Eddy's Toyota Camry, and the car was traced deep into Pennsylvania late that night. The turning point came in December 2012, when a visibly distressed Shoaf suffered a breakdown. Admitted for evaluation, she confessed to federal agents that she and Eddy had planned and carried out the murder. She provided crucial details, such as their decision to count to 3 before stabbing and how they covered the body with branches and rocks when the ground proved too hard to dig. Shoaf led investigators to the ravine where Skylar's remains were found in January 2013. DNA in Eddy's trunk sealed the connection. When legal proceedings began, Shoaf accepted a plea agreement, pleading guilty to second-degree murder on May 1, 2013. During trial testimony, she admitted, "We stabbed her." She told the court that their motive stemmed from emotional immaturity and fear that Skylar would expose the relationship dynamics between her and Eddy. In her sentencing hearing, Shoaf expressed remorse and offered apologies to Skylar's family, though doubts lingered over whether her emotional breakdown or strategic confession drove her statements. She received a 30-year sentence with parole eligibility after 10 years. Eddy, tried as an adult, pleaded guilty to first-degree murder on January 24, 2014, though she offered no apology or explanation. Her sentencing hearing granted mercy under West Virginia law, giving her life imprisonment with parole potential after 15 years. This case ranks as one of the most disturbing examples of teenage violence in modern American history. Not because of graphic brutality, which investigators avoided emphasizing, but because of how easily normal adolescent minds succumb to group pressure. Both girls were not strangers to criminal behavior. They tested knives beforehand, spoke in code about the plan count to 3, and brought cleanup supplies. Actions that suggested motive, preparation, and a shared detachment from morality. From a criminal justice perspective, the murder of Skylar Nice spotlighted several crucial issues. First, delaying the Amber Alert meant months passed before discovery, leading to changes in West Virginia law, now known as Skylar's Law, mandating earlier alerts for children showing no signs of distress. Second, the case exemplified the power of digital forensic evidence. Cell tower logs, surveillance video, and text message metadata contradicted the teens' changing stories, guiding investigators to the truth. Third, the judicial response to teenage offenders was tested. The system aimed to balance accountability with recognition of neurological development. Shoaf received a lengthy sentence with parole prospects, while Eddy was given life but could apply for release as a young adult. Psychologically, the killings demonstrate how adolescent emotional regulation remains underdeveloped, making groupthink dangerous, especially when unfettered by adult guidance or mental health support. Their inability to conflict resolve, paired with substances and secrecy, became fuel for tragedy. Investigators now point to these red flags: dramatic social withdrawal, fantasy-driven group dynamics, sudden secrecy, and weapon fascination. Mental health professionals stress early intervention, counseling, conflict mediation, and open communication as essential to prevent similar breakdowns. On a community level, the Nice murder cast a long shadow of grief and distrust. Parents questioned how well they could know their children. Schools and social services examined policies on teen behavior and reporting suspicious conduct. Law enforcement developed protocols for missing teens who don't fit typical profiles and enhanced collaboration with federal agencies early in suspicious cases. Now, Sheila Eddy and Rachel Shoaf remain incarcerated at Laken Correctional Center. Both have parole opportunities in 2028, when Eddy will be 32 and Shoaf 38. Their remorse, or lack thereof, will be scrutinized. Even then, is rehabilitation possible after friendship became murder? Or will their emotional impulses still linger? The murder of Skylar Nice remains painful because it shatters illusions that teenage friendships are benign. It reminds us that vulnerability, secrecy, resentment, and peer pressure can combine into lethal force. For parents, educators, and mental health advocates, it's a call to detect the early whispers of distress, the change in tone, the secret chats, the mockery masked as fun. Understanding teenage psychology isn't about fear. It's about prevention. Recognizing emotional intensity and responding with compassion may stop the next tragedy. If these stories made you think twice, if they gripped you, shocked you, or left you craving to know what lies beneath the surface, hit that subscribe button now and join the Mindframe True Crimes family. Every week we dive deeper into the hidden corridors of the human mind, unraveling the truths behind the headlines and the secrets even courtrooms can't fully reveal. And to all my loyal subscribers and returning viewers, thank you for keeping your mind in the frame. You're the reason we can keep shining a light into the world's darkest corners. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, the mind is the most dangerous place of all. This is Mindframe True Crimes. Until next time.